As I said, let's begin with a word of prayer. Father, we come to you this morning looking to see your word, to understand it more carefully, to know the people who are our spiritual ancestors. Show us today how John was born and why he was born, maybe. Just give us insight into the Baptist. We thank you in Jesus' name. Amen.
Amen. And just a bit of housekeeping. If you're speaking, speak kind of loud, because he's in front of the mic, but we're not.
And you got to drop that mask. Otherwise, we just hear a muffle.
Might help. Yeah.
All right, we'll start with the Gospel of Luke. We'll go to chapter 1. And let me summarize what we had last week. Last week we saw Mary visit Elizabeth and spend some time down there getting reacquainted, and realizing how it was that the Spirit was moving through regular people to accomplish what God wanted accomplished. She then left, and in my opinion, she went to live with Joseph's parents down in Bethlehem. And then that left Elizabeth at that point in her pregnancy, which is about 9 months, which seems to me a magic number or something. I can't help it. I gotta make the joke. Okay, and that's where we are at the moment. Mary has left, and Elizabeth is still pregnant, but not for long. Okay, we're starting with verse 57. Let's read just 57 and 58, please.
Now the time came for Elizabeth to give birth, and she bore a son. Her neighbors and relatives heard that the Lord had shown his great mercy to her, and they rejoiced with her.
Thank you. So let's look at that. Good, I did that. Any question or anything come out in your mind? I think Ken mentioned last week, well, why did she leave just when Elizabeth was going to be delivering? Couldn't Elizabeth have needed more help or something? And that's the answer, is that she left maybe so that she wouldn't be in the way. Because she should have been living in the house with them. This way it kind of opens up more room for others to come and go.
We also don't know if Elizabeth had other help locally, mother-in-law or somebody.
Right. Well, we can be sure that she did. There would have at least been Hebrew midwives in the general area. So I'm sure that she had help available. And besides, remember from the back when she conceived, she probably took some time off to take it quiet and easy and wasn't doing a lot of other work. And so they would have had other people come in, maybe even a servant. I don't know their situation, but they probably were financially okay.
May have been.
That's what I said.
Yeah. Probably,
because he worked in the temple. He would have been paid relatively well, I would think. You know. Okay. So in early October, now we're going to put this up, we're in about the month of October, in about the year 6 BC. You'll see that up here at the top, October of 6 BC, and we're in the Judean hill country. In early October, in Ein Karim, Elizabeth went into labor. Mary had just recently left to go to Bethlehem to live with Joseph's folks for the duration of her pregnancy, which is only another 3 months. The early rains had just begun. As expected, Elizabeth gave birth to a son, and by the next day, the neighbors and relatives were stopping by to congratulate Zacharias and Elizabeth and to bring gifts of food, offers of health, and prayers for the family. Now that's my statement, because I can't prove it, but it's kind of like when we were whenever something happened where we were in the Midwest, if something happened at house, all of a sudden neighbors would just start helping out. They'd bring a pot, a pot of food, or they'd come over and bring some item, or they'd come over and help out things, because that's what friends and neighbors do. I'm transferring that to them and saying that's probably what happened.
But I think another reason Mary might have left gets back to the timeline. And it could be that there was also the concern if when Elizabeth gave birth and she, and then say 3 months went by and all of a sudden Mary has her baby, people, even though
Good.
there could be speculation, and so to avoid that, they just kind of said, okay, it's time to go back to Bethlehem.
That makes sense.
Yeah, I'm not saying that's,
No, it makes sense. One more additional way to protect Mary and that relationship. Sounds good. Any other questions, thought, or comments about what we've just read so far?
Too bad neighbors aren't like that now, helping out.
Sure they are.
Not
But
a lot.
I'm going to say it's changed.
Yeah.
Neighbors within the church, our family, I think, are still going to do that.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
I just can't imagine if something would happen with you that you wouldn't have people coming over to help.
I already have.
But that doesn't mean your next door neighbor in town.
Right, I'm talking about neighbors.
Late physical, local.
It's
I
kind of
think
sad anymore.
It's not anymore. Yeah, even those enemies used to be nice enough to come by and do something.
Right.
Not enemies, but
No.
Well, it also depends on where you are.
Well, that's true.
When we went to, when Amy was living in Africa as part of the Peace Corps, one night she got, after dark, she got a knock on the door, and it was this young neighbor, 18-year-old pregnant, about ready to pop lady, and she was knocking on the door, and Amy let her in, and she said, "Whatever you do not go outside." Now, she just walked from her house to Amy's house, because there were hyenas.
Yeah.
And she said, "Those are not dogs. Do not go outside tonight at all.
Yeah.
Just stay inside."
Interesting.
And Amy said, "Okay, great." And then she left and walked back to her house, of course. But
Wow.
but that's a neighbor.
That's
I mean, that's
neighborly.
neighbor helping neighbor. But
Yeah.
that's routine.
Yeah.
Especially in poorer countries, I think
Right.
people are
Right.
better about
Yeah.
stepping up to help someone in need.
Or more rural environments where there
Yeah.
are fewer neighbors.
Yeah.
Well, when we first moved to Lake Stevens, I knew everybody on 2 blocks. I lived
Yeah.
over there by Norm's Market, and I knew everybody on both those roads up and down.
Not now.
No.
People across your street, you have no idea who lives
No.
over there.
I know the next door neighbor.
Yeah.
That's-
So I suspect that as she gave birth, she was an older woman. Please remember, she must have been in her late 40s. She's giving birth. They're going to want to come over, and they've known her for years. Because again, less movement of people. They're going to be there forever. They know her. So that's my opinion. Okay, let's have 57, 59. Oh, I'm going to read this part. On the 8th day, they came to circumcise the child, and they were going to name him Zacharias after his father. But his mother said, "No, he is to be called John." They said to her, "None of your relatives has that name." Then they began motioning. Oh, let's stop right there, okay? Does that bring up any thoughts to you?
Well, names were exceedingly important, and routinely people do get named after their relatives,
Yes.
grandfathers, fathers, whoever, uncles. And in this day, they weren't giving Elizabeth any credibility to be able to name the baby,
It's
because
true.
she was a woman, probably.
Also, remember, Zacharias can't speak still. He still can't talk. But you're right. I think also because she's not the head of the house, not the man, that therefore,
Well, one of the things that's become real popular in our society today is that people are going by all 3 of their names.
Yeah.
That you will see like in credits in movies instead of
Oh.
days like
Oh,
John
the
Wayne.
last name.
John, it would be John Marion Wayne.
oh,
And you see a lot more of that now.
well, that's maybe because we have more people. We better delineate who
Well,
those other ones
they're
are.
partially, I think it's because they're proud of their, more now of their parish, they
Oh,
want to
interesting.
get that out there.
Well,
But-
And yet I've heard just the opposite, which is we want to name them anything but a relative,
Well,
and we want it to be uniquely spelled and stuff.
Well, when I first started
Right.
teaching in '74, that was one of the problems that was coming to an end too, though. When I started, was what I called the 70 flower kids. And they named their children the most unusual names, and they never gave thought
Yeah,
to the repercussions down the road that could potentially have for that child. And so, you'd be looking at that child, and you might have this child in your thing that's called Sunbeam or Sunflower or something, and you had to keep a straight face on,
uh-huh.
but you had to also be respectful of that.
And it's-
Names
yeah,
are powerful. Names are very, very powerful.
Right.
Yeah.
And in those days, you were going to say something else? No? In these days, names were even more important. The name actually still, if it wasn't a relative, it would be something that defines who you are. And here comes Elizabeth going, well, we're going to name him John. Well, I kind of think that's good. But in this case, they're going to exactly where you said, woman, there's nobody like that in your family. Going back to tradition. Okay? So it continues. And that is 61. Someone read from 61 through 64, please.
yeah, I can get it.
Thank you.
They said to her, "None of your relatives has this name." Then they began motioning to his father to find out what name he wanted to give him. He asked for a writing tablet and wrote, "His name is John." And all of them were amazed. Immediately his mouth was open and his tongue freed, and he began to speak, praising God.
Okay. Does that strike you?
Would have been a surprise to people.
Amazing.
All this, gosh, 9 months or so, he has not been able to speak, or not been willing to speak. We don't know. Not been able, it's likely. And we knew he could write. We knew he was reading and writing because he was working in the temple.
He also backed up what this crazy lady was saying
I was
about what
just
they
gonna
call
say
him.
that, agreeing with his wife,
Yeah,
yeah.
crazy. Why? Okay, let's go on. On the 8th day, if you look here, you'll see that that is scriptural. Leviticus 12:3. On the 8th day, the flesh of the foreskin shall be circumcised. Okay, why?
Makes them a Jew.
No.
Makes them a,
Keep going though. Yes, you're
Well,
about right. I'm going to confirm your
but
words.
a follower of the faith of the Hebrew people.
No. A member of the covenant.
Right.
It's not exactly a follower yet.
Well, but also a descendant of Abraham.
Yes. And again, it's the physical thing here. It's done for a physical reason. They set them off from all others, set them as a unique people dedicated to God.
And that was one of the problems, if you go back in history, that was one of the final way that the Nazi regime would identify people of Hebrew
Yeah.
heritage,
Interesting.
whether they were or not, was simply have them pull their pants down. The men were terrified of it because there was no way to cover that up.
Yeah, that's
You know,
true.
and there are a lot of medical reasons for men to be circumcised beyond the Christian, or excuse me, beyond the religious connotation.
Right.
And so it put a lot of men in jeopardy who didn't need to be. But it's a very telling
Good.
thing.
On the other hand, not only Jews circumcised.
Correct.
The Canaanites, a lot of them would circumcise. They were down in Egypt, they would circumcise. It was not that uncommon, so it wasn't that. But even so, you must be circumcised as a male to be a member of the covenant, that deal that God made with you. Okay, that was the critical issue, and it says on the 8th day. Okay, all right. On the 8th day, after the baby was born, Zacharias and Elizabeth, being good religious people they are, took the baby to the temple complex. Now I'm going to show you the temple complex. Okay, let me kind of define it a little bit for you, describe it for you a little bit. The temple complex this is the platform. And this is the fortress that the Romans built, okay? This is the area where the Gentiles were allowed to be, okay? Then you come through the gate into the next section, which is where women could be. Men would pass through, but women could come into this part here.
Jewish women.
Jewish women, okay? Gentiles all stayed out here. Then, if you went up through the gates, which we'll see later, you could be, as a man, this is where Israel, males, this is where males who have been circumcised are part of the covenant, this is where they would go. Then you could move up into the actual area here where the priest would go, and that's where your altar was for sacrificing. So, for example, when you were coming down for Passover, that's where you would take your Passover lamb to have it sacrificed. Okay? And then finally into here is the temple. This is the Holy of Holies. Okay? When you come into here, that was, you don't go there. Okay? There are 3 doorways here. Okay? And you'll see that they came up through this gate. This is called the triple gate, the double gate. They were way down below. You would enter them down low, and then you would climb up the stairs and come out here onto the platform. So it actually went down below. You were down here, you walked up to the platform, which is way above you. You enter the gate, and you climb up and come out here. And you'll see those later. Okay? So when they came to the temple, first of all, they had to make sure they were clean. The mikvah, they would make sure they were clean enough to be coming up. They'd come up inside to the temple platform. Then they would go on in to these 3 areas, and we'll see what those look like. Any questions so far? So they would come up here through the gate, up onto the platform, and they would come up to one of these 3 doorways. We'll call them that, patios almost. Questions? Okay. To be circumcised at the gate of the firstborn. One of those gates was actually called the gate of the firstborn. And that's this one, right here. There are the 3 of them, and you'd come up to that, you walk up and you'd say, I have a firstborn to be circumcised, and that's where they would do it.
Outside the gate, inside?
I don't know that.
Okay.
But they would both be there, but if it was inside, only Zechariah would be allowed to go in. She would not be. Elizabeth would not be allowed to go in. So I don't know if they actually set it up and did the circumcision right there in front, or whether they went inside. I have no idea. This is the model that's built in Jerusalem of the old temple area of the city of Zion, of Jerusalem. Okay, and why it has this type of thing, I don't know. I don't know why it doesn't look exactly like the others, but that's not up to me to decide. But this was known as the gate of the firstborn. Now, it's really quite interesting, I think. Any thoughts or comments yet? Okay. What I think is special is that they get to go and have the circumcision done in Jerusalem. It could have been done anywhere by any rabbi. You know, and if you're up in Nazareth or up in Galilee anyway, you wouldn't have time to go down there with your firstborn in time.
But these guys lived near enough to get there.
Correct. And he's all related to the temple.
Mm-hmm.
This is special, I think. It's like, well, I don't know what it's like, but it's special. Okay, any question, thought, or comment?
Well,
I could understand that to an extent when I look, and this is going to sound ridiculous, but the same thing is true with the Mormon faith, because when they get married, the marriage is even considered more blessed if they are in the temple in Utah.
Correct. That's
so there's that hierarchy of importance.
That makes sense.
And so, yeah, and so my guess would be is that Zechariah felt, because of his station, maybe he felt he had the right to take his son there, and he wanted to take his son there, and he didn't have to go through a lot of channels because he already had that privilege and
Good.
stuff. So
I agree.
I don't know.
I think that's probably pretty close.
The other part of this, though, is when they questioned Elizabeth about the name, if Elizabeth was there, this was outside that doorway.
Yes. Yes. Now, John means, or Johanna, means God is gracious. What do they know about what to expect from this child, John? Do you remember back when he was in the temple and the angel confronted him and said, "You're going to have a son"? Do you remember anything about what he said? Let's go back.
Remember?
Luke. All right. In verse 24, it says, after those days his wife will, oh wait, no, let's back up even before that. Let's go to the temple. In verse
17.
14, 15, 16, 17, with the spirit and power of God, of Elijah, he will go before him, whoever him is, we know that's the Messiah, to turn the hearts of parents to their children and the disobedient to the wisdom of the righteous, to make ready a people prepared for the Lord. This kid is special. And I think that Zacharias has every intention of raising this child in a very special way. Okay? He has the capability, because he's in the temple area and they're in Jerusalem, to raise John maybe to be a priest.
Well, and they already, he must never drink wine or strong drink.
Right.
So to me, that already tells you he's going to be raised in a special way.
Correct. And this is part of why I think they really wanted to bring him here. Anything else? Okay. They took the baby to the temple complex to be circumcised at the gate of the firstborn and named, though it was not common practice to wait so long to name the baby. Normally you would name them right away. Okay? They're going to wait till he's at the temple being circumcised to get the name there. That's, again, I think part of what you said, Dave, which is this is a special place. I have a special child. We're going to do this in a very special way.
Also, in African culture today, children don't sometimes get named right away. There's enough infant mortality that they name them when they think they're going to make it.
Survive.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, out in the villages, not necessarily in the city.
Right.
But out in the villages, I do know that they delay naming of the child.
I will tell you this story. I delayed the naming of all our children until I could get acquainted with them and know their personalities. Because as you all know, babies each have unique personalities. And I was sensitive enough to, I've been through the pregnancy with my wife, and when they're born, I get to spend time with them and learn who they really are. And in the hospital, they would say, "Have you named it yet?" And we'd say, "No." And they'd say, "Well, baby Westling is," because I wanted to name them what is appropriate for them. My wife, Ann, would pick out all sorts of names. We look at how they tied together, whether they were balanced and yada, how they'd be shortened. She did all that work for me. And then I would wait to see what kind of personality and see which name would fit to oh, it was terrible. One of them wouldn't fit at all. She had to go back and rename them. But there are reasons why you don't name them immediately. But other people, their name, as soon as they find out it's a boy from ultrasound, they go, "Oh, there's going to be such and such," and that's the name. They don't pay close attention. Each of us has our own story. Anything else? Zacharias still could not speak. Now, maybe this was psychological blocking. It wasn't physical, we know that. The angel said, "You will not be allowed to speak." Bing! Psychology shut it off. Even if he tried, he couldn't speak. That's my opinion from the way they're saying it in the text. Okay? So, he still couldn't speak. And go, yeah, he wouldn't even nod. He's got to speak. Okay? So when the priest suggested that the boy be named after his father, Elizabeth humbly said that the child should be called John. Any question, thought, or comment?
The only thing that I was thinking about is that in the days when women couldn't read and write, how was he communicating with his wife while he couldn't speak?
Sometimes you just don't want to, I guess. I'm just kidding. We don't know that Elizabeth couldn't read or write.
Right. Yeah.
She was also raised in a righteous family. She would have at least had her basic, and with Zechariah there, she probably would have gotten something, but we don't know. But yes, he could write. Okay? Let's see. Elizabeth, yeah. When the priest appealed directly to Zacharias, he motioned for a writing instrument and wrote down his decision, John. Now, what writing instrument could he... Just give me a ballpoint pen, guys, and some paper.
Well, I mean, tablet and piece of chalk, or who knows what
Wax
they had.
tablet, or even clay. He could have even had a skin, because skins were not uncommon in those days. And some...
Papyrus would have been too expensive to use that way.
It's not like paper today where you wad up and throw it away. Papyrus was very expensive. It'd be cheaper just to get a little piece of vellum or a little bit of lamb skin and write on the inside of this.
You could write it in the sand.
True, he could write it in the dirt.
Yeah.
But that's not what they did. So in this case, okay, he's from the temple. He managed to have this writing stuff handy. Wonder if he was a scholar of some sort. Because if it's right there, no, this was up at the temple, so they would have had something for him to write with. Okay, anything else?
I was going to just, she was making fun, but Deanne, if you remember the scriptures though, at one point Jesus bends down
That's right.
and writes in the sand.
Yeah, well, the dirt, yeah.
Yeah.
And I just excited, but that would not have been necessarily uncommon. And I was just thinking, we're talking dirt floors.
It's
You
true.
know, so I
Very
mean,
true. You could have
we have
scratched
no way
it.
to, yeah, we have no way to know, but I think anything is possible.
Yes.
It does say tablet in our text,
Yeah.
though.
Correct. So he was given probably a clay tablet, and he carved it in, and then later they either erase it or they fire it in a kiln. We haven't found it yet archaeologically, so we don't know that it's... I'm just kidding. Sorry. Okay, and he writes John, or obviously he'd write the proper name, Johannan, but in this case we'll just say John. We'll take care of this later when something else happens. Then Zacharias could speak again. He is John, Zacharias said, and John was circumcised. He can talk again. Yes. I'm sure Elizabeth was just thrilled to have him talk. Okay. Then let's finish this up. And that would be, let's read parts of it at a time. And we'll start with 64, you did. Start with 65 and read through 66.
65.
65 to 66.
And fear came on all those living around them, and all these matters were being talked about in all the hill country of Judea.
One more.
And all who heard them kept them in mind, saying, "What then will this child turn out to be? For the hand of the Lord was certainly with him."
Good. Okay, so what does it tell us?
Well, it tells you that the neighbors were clearly impressed, or somehow they believed that this was something different. This was not routine.
Okay, also notice you have a time frame change here. You stretch time out. They have left the temple already. They've gone home. People are hearing the stories. And so now they're starting to respond to what they heard. Okay? And so the neighbors obviously still communicate with Elizabeth and Zacharias. And the other priests, Zacharias' buddies, heard. And they're starting to spread the story that this child is different. Okay? And, of course, they were going, well, just how different is it? We don't like change very much. you know, small town, don't like change very much, okay? And they're going, okay, what does it mean when all of these things have happened? Okay? Any thought or comment for that?
Well, I would just, as a sidebar to that, my wife always teases me, I would never thought of myself as not being flexible. And I was really tied to the red hymnal, not the one we're using now. But
I know the red one,
okay.
yes.
And we were living, it was an early part of my career, and we were down in the Dalles going to Zion Lutheran Church in Dallas, Oregon. And they made the switch to the green hymnal. And I thought that was the most blasphemous thing that they could have in my mind.
Yeah.
And I had a terrible time adjusting to it. But once I did, you know, I really liked it. But my wife teased me about it. She said, I thought you were broad-minded and that you were flexible. You are so hung up. And when I stopped and I thought about it, then I was slightly embarrassed because I was making a big deal out of something that really wasn't a big deal.
Yeah.
And then the switch from the green to this, I like to call it a red hymnal, but whatever you want to call the color. I had a slight problem with it, but at the same time I realized that we have to move forward. And it was kind of neat, but you know, you do get stuck. You do get stuck with change. Change is hard. You know, it's like anything else.
Okay, let's look at the human species for a moment. I suspect that we as a people, as humans, just really get comfortable in certain environments. We feel at home, everything is familiar, so that anything else that sticks into it, and I think it's a survival technique, anything that changes could be dangerous. So you get real comfortable with it so that you can notice the things that are different. Think of your own bodies. Overall, you're healthy. You don't think about that healthy hand very often. You think about the pain you've got in your left knee. The pain is what comes up. Everything else you're familiar with. Same thing, I think, in our societies. We get comfortable in certain ways of being in our environment. Okay? And any change has got to be identified and brought into our environment carefully. Your service book is one of those little things. You look at it and go, okay, how's this going to work now? Do I have to make this change? Or if you're going to move somewhere else, or if your car is having a problem, you're going to get a new car, or there's new technology. Whatever it is, we're familiar with our environment. We evaluate anything going to be changed into our environment.
You need to go downtown and tell all those people that's fighting for what we're, you know, the museum and all.
Oh, there's battles over that. Of course there
Oh,
are,
my
because that's a
goodness,
change,
it's horrible.
and this is traditional and
Yeah.
standard procedure.
Crazy.
I don't think it's crazy. I think it's
Not yet.
normal. And while I don't appreciate sometimes when it goes, it is normal. Okay? And I think that's true of all sorts of things. Now, let's look at this a little bit more closely in another facet. Because I want to make my opinion known. We get so many things in our environment that we're supposed to deal with. Let's take other people. Other people, we're supposed to accept them all in a certain way. You know, they're all nice, and even the monsters really aren't bad, and that comes from Monsters, Inc., okay, the movie. But we have so many of them, it's hard to hold them as individuals. Instead, you hold them as a group. And so you say, this is in general what I expect from this group of people based on certain stories or experiences that I've had. But that doesn't allow for the individual characters within those groups until they become known to you. We have to do this. Our brains are too limited. Okay? So we have to categorize a people, a place, an event, whatever it is. We categorize it and wait for something unique to come out of it to be different. Does this make sense to you? It's all part of the same survival techniques that we have as a species and the limits we have to our brains.
I mean, for me, it was, I go back, when I was growing up in Wenatchee, Chelan County, I had no concept of inclusivity as it related to other nationalities.
Yes.
Because it was a white German community, period. It was farmers.
And who could trust those Norwegians?
Right, exactly. And then I had moved to a Norwegian community in Ballard. But the point I want to make is that I had no interaction with other nationalities, and so I had a preconceived idea. I was taught inclusivity. I was taught, to think of all people as equal. But my first time in contact with, say, someone of the African American heritage, I was working for the state of Washington at an institution. And my wife always says, when you put a face on something, it changes. And I got to work with two of the most wonderful, delightful African American women who were mothers. And it changed my attitude and my perception. Where that perception came from, I to this day do not know. But it turned it 180 degrees and said, wait a minute, they're just like me.
And that became your new concept of what that group of people was like.
Yeah.
Because you actually met someone from the
Right,
group.
it made me realize, it's kind of like Ken's experience with his daughter going over to Africa and meeting all these new people.
Yes.
That when you meet them and you get to know them, it's a completely different thing than picking up the National Geographic of 1929, at reception. And, and I'm like, when I went to Japan, my preconceived idea of what a person of Japanese ancestry was like, they're wonderful people. But you have to immerse yourself a little bit, and you have to say, okay, God has created this diversity for a reason, and appreciate it. And I'm going
to stop you for a second because you kept saying, twice you said, and they were wonderful people, meaning the whole group. Again, you have reclassified the whole group based on your experience. There are going to be people in there, because you said the people were wonderful. There are going to be people in there that are not, I almost said something, that are not pleasant, okay, or that are violent, or that are evil. That's also part of, depends, if someone met them as part of their experience, they were abused by someone from that group, their whole perception of that group is in the negative first. So, or if they were, to use the slavery issue, if they were this subservient, less educated group, and you were their master, well then you had that as their perception. You wouldn't see the intelligent, the delightful people that are there.
Yeah.
It's a matter of our brains are so limited, we have to take a generalization first. Then we encounter them and we can, and it's not just them, it could be homeless people, it could be people in Roman Catholic churches. Remember the old issue with Roman Catholic. So it could be any group. You start with a generalization and then you adapt it. And each person adapts it differently based on their experience. I just wanted to say that. Okay, so what we have happening here is the story of John being spread around. Zachariah is encountering him, the angel that he's being given to Elizabeth in her old age. All this story is now being passed around, and people are going, what is that for? Now, come on, this is different. How am I going to adapt? I think he's an evil child. He's probably the devil's spawn, and that Zachariah is crazy. You never know. It depends on their own interpretation of it. But here, now the people are starting to wonder about it, and let me finish reading it. Because the last of this reading is quite considerable. It reads, this is Zechariah speaking. Blessed be the Lord God of Israel, for he has looked favorably on his people and redeemed them. He has raised up a mighty Savior for us in the house of his servant David, as he spoke through the mouth of his holy prophets from of old, that we would be saved from our enemies and from the hand of all who hate us. Thus he has shown the mercy promised to our ancestors and has remembered his holy covenant. the oath that he swore to our ancestor Abraham to grant us that we, being rescued from the hands of our enemies, might serve him without fear in holiness and righteousness before him all our days. And you, child, will be called the prophet of the Most High, for you will go before the Lord to prepare his ways, to give knowledge of salvation to his people by the forgiveness of their sins. By the tender mercies of our God, the dawn from on high will break upon us, to give light to those who sit in darkness and in the shadow of death, to guide our feet into the way of peace. Whew! Did he have time to think about it?
Well, and you don't know how much of this came from his own mind and how much of this came from the angel.
Or from the author who wrote it.
Okay,
Don't
sure.
forget that it's written
That's true.
by someone else later. He's probably added a few things to it. It's always very possible, and it's not a problem. They don't consider that to be wrong. Okay? But just look at this. He's looking at this child, and he's telling his neighbors and everybody how special he is and what he's going to be doing.
Yeah. We also know this was written well after the fact.
Well after.
They knew the story, but yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I mean by remember the author. This is not necessarily what he said specifically, but it is the general thought that he's going, I see he's automatically, well, let me finish. Anything else first before I go on? Anything that you can get from this? I'm going to summarize it in this way. Zacharias was asked to explain the meaning of the event. Zacharias said, "Praise God who has been gracious to my wife and to me and to our nation. The Lord is once again moving to save his people as promised to David." And then I'll add, and as the prophets Micah and Isaiah said he would. All should follow the Spirit of God Almighty and obey his laws, the Torah. Okay? Remember, Zechariah is at the temple. Torah is everything to him. Okay? So, I think I summarized it without a lot of the flowers. Okay? And I'm trying to deal with what the editor might have added back in. I think he was amazed that God is working through, has given this gift to his wife, to himself, and to his nation again. And is fulfilling his promise.
How could he not be? Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, but he's trying to also convince those around him that this is the case. And that's where it comes in. Okay? Amazing. Just amazing. Okay. Anything else before we continue? Thought?
Well, the one thing that comes back to me, you were saying he had time to think. Well, one of the blessings of his silence, if you will, was he listened. And a lot of us, I know when I do my devotions at night before I go to bed, the hardest thing to do is to listen. It's easy to pray and to give thanks, but it's very difficult to sit there quietly and listen for God to tell me what to do. And I find that, I work at that, but I'm not very good at it, to just be able to listen. And I know in the devotional booklets, a lot of times they talk about being silent at times, just meditating. And he had that. He was given a blessing of silence.
Yeah. Yep, Elizabeth thought the same. I'm just kidding. But yes, but now a question for you. How are you listening? Are you waiting for God's voice to speak? Is it just quiet?
No, I think
or is your brain functioning?
I think more of just a feeling.
Feeling, okay.
I don't necessarily say he couldn't, I couldn't hear a voice.
Or you couldn't make your own talking?
Yeah, but
yeah, okay.
I'm not saying I'm listening to that, but I'm listening more, I think I'm more trying to sense a feeling. Is
Okay.
God where he's taking me?
Okay,
And am I following that?
all right,
Rather than my just presuming it.
okay. And that's called being, in your case, is waiting on the Lord.
Yeah.
Okay,
And so in that, but I think the ability to sit quietly and just listen and I'm not, like I say, I think he was given that blessing. He
Okay,
may not have realized it, but like to come up, even if someone heard him say some of this, it was a blessing that he had the time to listen to the Lord
yes,
and realize
yeah.
this child, how important this child was.
And his duties at the temple would have been reduced because he couldn't speak.
Yeah.
So he's got time, he's studying, he's thinking about it. Now, does anybody else have an experience similar to this as they wait on the Lord? Okay? So, let me look at the prophecies themselves. Okay? I specifically refer to Micah here, which reads in Micah 5:2, "But as for you, Bethlehem Ephrathah, too little to be among the clans of Judah, from you one will go forth for me to be ruler in Israel, is going forth or from long ago, from the days of eternity." So he's going to prepare this way, or something like that, right? This is Zechariah thinking about John. Okay, he doesn't know the details, but he's trying to understand what the prophecies are that are important. And this one is probably one of them. Going to go forth and be a ruler. Okay? Because he's talking about saving his people. And then there is Isaiah. The people who walk in darkness, and we hear this all the time, the people who walk in darkness will see a great light. Those who live in a dark land, the light will shine on them. These are prophecies that as he's thinking about it, and other things he's reading, he's putting together. And so he actually quotes this right here. He says, in 79, "To give light to those who sit in darkness and in the shadow of death, a guide to our feet." So, this is where John is at. Okay? His father is thinking high thoughts of him, for him. He's planning his life. Oh, wouldn't our children just love to hear we planned their lives? They would find us every
I also noticed to me that the words that are used are probably not as effective today because we have electric lights. But in those days, being in darkness, if you've ever been backpacking somewhere or something like that,
Yeah,
when it gets dark at night,
started.
it's a different kind of dark,
It is.
right?
It
And
is.
you've got things around you that you may not be able to identify.
It's scary. It can be.
Yeah,
Especially, I think
yeah.
of it many times.
And so
I've been
to
backpacking.
sit in darkness would have a different connotation to these people.
Good point. When you're doing your devotions and you're waiting on the Lord, you're sitting in darkness. You may have a little nightlight on, because we're in electrical age, but just to go outside, out on your back patio, and sit down and just think, let it happen. Maybe that would be a way to bring in the full emotion.
Yeah, but with the lights off, I mean, it's a different,
The lights off, I go to
experience.
sleep, you know that.
Yeah, but we're safe and warm in our homes.
Yes.
With walls around us.
True.
You know, I mean, to sit in darkness is different for these people.
I agree.
Well, I look at, I'll use William as an example, though it terrifies him. And he needs reassurance.
Yeah.
And the last thing, I think, one of the things my aunt did to me, who was now deceased, when I was a little boy, my grandparents had a hallway that went from the living room upstairs, and you could close it off, and it would be dark. And she hid in that closet area, or stairwell area, and I had no fear of the dark. And I walked in there, and she jumped out and scared me. Well, for years, I was scared of the dark. So I don't want that for William, but when we had the lights go out recently, the power was off like, I don't know, 6, 7, 8 hours, something like that.
Uh-huh.
He was terrified, but first thing he wanted lights. So
Lights.
he has a flashlight. So the first thing he did, he ran to find his flashlight.
Yeah.
And then we spent the rest of the time reassuring him. Everything was fine, we were
Yeah.
safe. We had fire going in the fireplace, all that.
Yeah.
But he had to be reassured that there was not something to be fearful of. But like you're saying, Ken, he kept thinking he was hearing things he couldn't understand. So Grandpa spent a lot of time listening and trying to explain possibly what he was hearing, which a lot of times was my dog snoring, but that's a different issue.
That's another
But,
one.
Yes.
getting over that. So, I mean, I think Ken's hit it. I mean,
So a lot of us grew up with fear of the dark. I did.
Oh, yeah.
But in this time and place, their fear of the dark also included things like predators outside that they knew were there.
They are,
Yeah,
yeah. Even hyenas.
Not a fantasy.
No. I will tell you that my grandmother used to be afraid of the dark. And my great-grandparents got a picture of Jesus, a painting, Jesus, framed it and put it in her room, and she was no longer afraid of the dark.
Oh.
It was always hung in her room, and I've got that in my house. I'll show it to you when you come by. What I want to now do is step aside a little bit and get away from this physical darkness and talk about Galilee. Because that later is very shortly after this. These people are in darkness, but what darkness are they in?
They think they are enlightened.
They're in spiritual darkness. The Gentiles are moving in, building cities. They're taking over the area. You have the Romans running the whole show in the whole land. You have the Syrians who are being mean, etc., etc. Where is the light? You have an abuse of the Torah, of the law of God, occurring, according to what Jesus tells us later. They're in darkness spiritually, and they need something. They are afraid, and rightfully so. But they're going to see a great light, and this child is going to start that process. Wow. That's just awesome.
Well, what we don't have, though, is how John came to perceive, to accept that in himself. That part of that little story is missing. And
Oh, it's coming later, when we get to John beginning his ministry. I'll promise you that. We're going to get more into that later.
Oh, okay.
Okay? Because that's where we understand what happens to him. Right now, he's just born, and it's Zechariah's opinion as to what he sees in this child that we're looking at right now. Okay. Any other thoughts, comments, questions?
It's kind of funny now with this darkness thing, when in the middle of the night or something, I'll hear a noise in there and it'll scare me, which when Kenny was there, it didn't. And what could Kenny do? He was 92, could not even walk across
The question is in you, why was that not scary? The question goes back to your relationship to Kenny.
Oh, okay.
He was always the one, now you tell me if I'm wrong, he was always the one to get up and handle these things. He's the one who helped to protect you, didn't he?
Well, I felt like it, but at that
See,
point in life, it
But
could
that's the habit you were in, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And so that was perfectly normal.
Just
Now he's not there.
Yeah.
It's
and
on
I hear
you.
that noise and I think, oh dear, what's that?
Again.
And it's my cat
Yeah,
acting up.
yeah, of course. So again, it's that what is comfortable
It's
and what is
weird
our
when you're
environment, and
alone in
then
that.
those things that break into it startle us. We have to look at them more carefully and see whether or not it's a danger to us.
It's just crazy.
Yeah. Same thing spiritually. We have to question changes in our spiritual life and evaluate whether or not this is appropriate for us. We have to come to that, and each one of us does that individually. And there are a lot of changes occurring in our spirituality in the last 50 years as Christians. There are more coming. And we have to look at this from the perspective of who we are, what we have as tradition, and our little environment, and decide what we can allow in and what we cannot, what is dangerous and what isn't. Okay? Go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say that to me it's hilarious because the church I grew up in Seattle, our Redeemers, is going through a big physical change.
Okay.
They're remodeling that church for about the fourth time. But it has caused, humorously, a real, the oldest members, which now my sister is one of, if she is not the oldest member, very close to it, they don't like it. They're used to what was there, like you're saying.
Yes.
All this changed, like I tried to share with her. I said, what the church there is doing, they're going from like our nave, or a sanctuary, where you got all the pews.
Right.
They're doing it now where they've gutted it, and they're going to remodel it, and it's going to be more a church in the round with the all.
Yeah, that's a style.
Right? Well, what I told her was, I said that the ministry that's going on there is vibrant, it's live, it's reaching out to the community, and they're addressing that. And I said, if you look at it, I said, this is not the first time that church is remodeled. I said, it remodeled before I left there as a young man. I said it remodeled during the time you were a woman and growing up, going to church there. I said now it's going through another tremendous change to meet the
Right.
needs of the community.
Right.
But that's scary
Yes.
for people my age to see all of a sudden this,
Yes.
this normalcy. But to put a little caveat on this, when my dad died and was his service was held there, they were going through a remodel.
Amazing.
Right. Okay. But they were mortified because at the point at which my dad's funeral took place, the organ didn't work. Does that sound familiar, Ken? And the piano was down where it shouldn't be, and the rugs were just being put in.
No, horrors.
Yeah, and so they came to my mom and they apologized, and my mom just laughed. She thought it was the funniest thing she ever heard. Because all the people, like you're saying,
That's it.
Deanne,
Yeah.
the people that were the important part were there.
Yeah.
Okay, but change is hard.
Yes.
And stuff. And I'm just saying, you're talking about all these changes and him coming to start that process, it's hard. It really, truly is hard.
Let me throw a change at you that was really hard. It's called the Reformation.
Oh, yeah.
Okay? The church as a whole goes through many changes. We are in a period of transition right now, and a lot of us are uncomfortable with certain things that are coming. We don't know if they're, we need to test them because we don't know if they're of the Lord. But am I allowed to test it and tell them what's right or wrong? Or is it the spirit, the group that decides what's right or wrong? I don't know. I'm just saying, it's a time of discomfort, especially to us older people who have our ways.
Like doing a Bible study on YouTube.
Oh, shut up. I don't want to hear that. Or trying to do Zoomy. I can't do that.
You should have been here years ago when they changed the altar.
Really?
Oh,
Yeah.
Were you there? Were you
Oh, yeah.
there?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, yes. There was so many people. Oh, so upsetting. What does that mean? Oh, it was kind
Oh, yeah.
of.
So-
you have.
Can't hear you.
Oh, yeah.
So this is normal to our species.
Right.
This is normal to any animal. A fox in its territory will look for what is different, not what is familiar. So will a horse in its range. It will look for what's familiar and it identifies things that are different that might be dangerous. That's it. That's the species. That's what's happening to the Jews here when they're comfortable and all of a sudden into this mix, God throws John. Oh, that's not comfortable. That's wrong. Something is not right here. And I'm sure that's the other side of the coin that is not being told. Okay? Because of time, I'm going to go ahead and let's shut this one down. And I thank you very much, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you.